there! Ready for a wellness adventure? Let's explore the world of health together!
Genes are often described as the body's instruction manual, but that comparison can create misunderstandings if people imagine a fixed script for life. According to genetics research, genes contain instructions for building proteins and regulating many biological processes that keep the body functioning. These instructions help shape physical characteristics, brain development, and many systems involved in behavior, learning, and health throughout life. Genes are made from DNA, a long molecule found inside nearly every cell of the human body and organized into structures called chromosomes. Humans inherit one set of chromosomes from each parent, creating a unique combination of genetic information that differs from every other individual. Even brothers and sisters usually receive different combinations of genes, because genetic material is mixed before being passed to the next generation. Identical twins are an exception because they begin from the same fertilized egg and share nearly identical genetic material. Scientists estimate that humans have about 20,000 protein-coding genes, but these genes work together in highly complex ways. Very few human traits depend on a single gene acting alone to produce a specific outcome under all conditions. Many characteristics are polygenic, meaning they are influenced by hundreds or even thousands of genes working together. Height provides a useful example of a polygenic trait because many different genes contribute small effects to overall growth. Eye color is influenced by several genes rather than one simple switch, although genetics plays a very strong role. Complex psychological traits such as personality or intelligence involve even larger numbers of genes interacting across development. This complexity means scientists rarely talk about a single gene for happiness, creativity, kindness, or intelligence. Instead, researchers study genetic variants that slightly increase or decrease the probability of certain biological outcomes. One of the most important ideas in genetics is the concept of heritability, which is often misunderstood by the general public. Heritability does not measure how much of a person's trait comes directly from genes and how much comes from the environment. According to public genetics research, heritability describes variation within a population rather than the biology of one individual. A heritability estimate asks how much of the observed differences between people can be associated with genetic differences. Imagine a classroom where students have different heights, weights, and athletic abilities because many factors influence their development. Scientists can estimate how much of those differences are statistically linked to inherited genetic variation within that specific group. A high heritability estimate does not mean environmental influences are unimportant or that change is impossible. It simply means genetic differences explain a significant portion of the variation observed under those environmental conditions. An important detail is that heritability always depends on the population being studied and the environment surrounding that population. If environmental conditions change, heritability estimates for the same trait can change as well without altering the underlying genes. Suppose every child in a community receives excellent nutrition, healthcare, and educational opportunities throughout development. Under those conditions, remaining differences in height or academic performance may appear more strongly associated with genetic variation. Now imagine another community where access to food and education varies greatly between families. Environmental differences would explain a larger proportion of variation because opportunities are not equally distributed. The genes themselves did not suddenly become stronger or weaker in their effects. The estimate changed because the environment changed and influenced developmental outcomes differently across individuals. This principle helps explain why heritability is not a universal number that applies everywhere and at all times. Public research institutions emphasize that heritability estimates are statistical tools rather than measures of biological destiny. A trait can have high heritability while remaining strongly influenced by environmental conditions and personal experiences. Height is one of the best examples because genetics contributes greatly to variation among healthy populations. However, severe malnutrition during childhood can prevent someone from reaching their genetically expected adult height. Genes may provide the biological potential, but nutrition and health help determine how much of that potential is realized. The same principle applies to many aspects of brain development and human behavior. A child may inherit tendencies that support language learning, but exposure to language remains necessary for development. Without interaction and communication during early life, language skills cannot develop normally despite genetic capacity. Scientists sometimes describe genes as providing a range of possible outcomes rather than a single unavoidable result. A useful comparison is to think of genes as the blueprint for building a house rather than the finished building itself. The blueprint provides important instructions, but materials, weather, construction quality, and maintenance influence the final result. Human development follows a similar pattern because biological instructions interact with life experiences over many years. Another useful comparison is a deck of playing cards dealt at the beginning of a game. The cards represent inherited genetic variation that each individual receives from their parents. The strategy used during the game represents choices, opportunities, education, relationships, and environmental experiences. Random events during the game represent accidents, illnesses, unexpected opportunities, and other life circumstances. The starting hand matters, but it does not completely determine the outcome of the game. A player with average cards may perform extremely well through good strategy and favorable circumstances. Likewise, strong cards may not guarantee success if circumstances become extremely challenging. Genetic predisposition works in much the same way because it changes probabilities rather than guaranteeing outcomes. Scientists often prefer the word predisposition because it avoids the misunderstanding that genes create unavoidable futures. A predisposition means that a certain outcome becomes more likely under certain conditions. It does not mean that the outcome must occur regardless of environment or experience. A person may inherit an increased tendency toward anxiety without ever developing an anxiety disorder. Supportive relationships, healthy coping skills, and positive environments can influence how that tendency develops across life. Another individual may inherit physical characteristics, favorable for athletic performance but never train or participate in sports. Potential alone does not produce achievement because development depends on interaction between biology and experience. This idea explains why identical twins can become increasingly different as they grow older. Although they begin with nearly identical genetic material, their experiences gradually diverge across time. Different friendships, education, hobbies, careers, injuries, and environments shape their development in unique ways. Twin studies have become one of the major tools for understanding heritability in human populations. Identical twins share nearly all their inherited genetic variation, while fraternal twins share about half on average. Researchers compare similarities between these groups to estimate genetic contributions to different traits. According to large scientific studies, identical twins often resemble each other more than fraternal twins for many characteristics. These characteristics include height, certain personality traits, and susceptibility to some medical conditions. However, identical twins are never perfectly identical in every aspect of behavior or health. Differences emerge because environmental influences and life experiences affect development throughout the lifespan. Adoption studies provide another valuable source of information for understanding heritability. Researchers compare adopted children with both their biological relatives and their adoptive families. These comparisons help separate inherited influences from shared household environments. Results consistently show that both genetic and environmental factors contribute to human development. Neither biology nor experience alone provides a complete explanation for most human traits. The scientific evidence supports interaction rather than competition between genes and the environment. The idea that heritable means inevitable is one of the most persistent myths in genetics. Modern genetics shows that inherited variation influences possibilities, tendencies, and probabilities rather than fixed destinies. Understanding this distinction provides the foundation for exploring how genes and environments work together throughout life. Another common misunderstanding is the belief that highly heritable traits cannot be changed through experience or intervention. Scientific research shows that heritability and changeability are completely different concepts that answer different biological questions. Heritability measures the source of variation within a population under certain conditions. Changeability describes whether a trait can respond to environmental influences, learning, treatment, or lifestyle adjustments. A characteristic can have high heritability while remaining highly responsive to environmental changes throughout life. Vision provides an excellent example because many forms of eyesight have strong genetic influences. A person may inherit a tendency toward nearsightedness from their biological parents. However, glasses or contact lenses can dramatically improve vision despite the genetic contribution. The genetic influence remains real, but the practical outcome can still be modified through intervention. Blood pressure offers another useful example of this principle in everyday life. Research supported by public health agencies shows that blood pressure has measurable genetic influences. At the same time, exercise, nutrition, medication, sleep quality, and stress management can affect blood pressure significantly. The existence of genetic risk does not eliminate the value of preventive care or healthy habits, scientists authentics. Risk refers to the probability that a particular outcome may occur under certain circumstances. Certainty means that separate the concepts of risk and certainty when discussing inherited characteristics. An outcome will happen regardless of conditions or experiences. Most genetically influenced human traits involve risk rather than certainty. This distinction is especially important when discussing mental health and neurological conditions. Some psychiatric disorders show significant genetic contributions in large scientific studies. According to public medical research, inherited factors can increase susceptibility to certain conditions. However, susceptibility is not the same as diagnosis or inevitable disease development. Many people with elevated genetic risk never develop the condition they are statistically more likely to experience. Likewise, individuals with relatively low genetic risk can still develop certain conditions under some circumstances. This pattern demonstrates that genes influence probabilities rather than creating guaranteed futures. Scientists sometimes describe this concept using the phrase genetic vulnerability. A vulnerability represents increased sensitivity to certain environmental or biological influences. Imagine two people standing outside during extremely cold weather without proper clothing. One person may have inherited biological characteristics that increase sensitivity to cold temperatures. The second person may tolerate the cold more comfortably because of different inherited traits. Both individuals are affected by the environment, but they respond differently because of biological variation. Human behavior often follows similar principles of variable sensitivity rather than absolute determination. Learning ability provides another useful example of this interaction between inherited variation and experience. Children inherit biological systems that support language learning and cognitive development. However, those systems require stimulation and practice to develop effectively throughout childhood. A child cannot learn to read simply because reading ability has genetic influences. Reading requires education, instruction, repetition, and opportunities to practice over many years. The same principle applies to musical ability, athletic performance, and artistic skills. Genetics may influence certain biological characteristics related to these activities. Training and experience remain necessary to develop those abilities into observable performance. Scientists often describe this relationship as biological potential interacting with environmental opportunity. Potential without opportunity may remain largely unrealized throughout life. Opportunity without biological support may also face practical limitations. Human development emerges from the interaction between these two influences rather than either factor alone. Another important concept is that genes influence biological systems rather than abstract personal qualities directly. There is no single gene that determines whether someone becomes honest, successful, creative, or compassionate. Complex behaviors arise from interactions among many brain systems working together across development. Genes may influence aspects of attention, memory, emotional regulation, or sensory processing. Those biological systems then interact with education, culture, family experiences, and social relationships. According to neuroscience research, behavior emerges from these interacting layers of influence. This layered model helps avoid overly simplistic explanations of human differences. Popular media sometimes suggests that scientists have discovered a gene for a particular behavior. Such headlines often oversimplify the actual research findings. In reality, scientists usually identify genetic variants associated with very small changes in probability. A single genetic variant may contribute only a tiny effect to an extremely complex characteristic. Many hundreds or thousands of such variants may contribute collectively to overall tendencies. Genome-wide association studies have revealed this complexity for many human traits. These studies compare genetic variation across very large populations to identify statistical patterns. Results consistently show that most complex traits involve many genes with individually small effects. Height is influenced by thousands of genetic variants spread across the human genome. Educational attainment and cognitive abilities also involve large numbers of contributing genetic factors. This complexity makes accurate prediction of individual outcomes extremely difficult. Scientists can estimate probabilities, but rarely predict precise personal futures from genetics alone. Another important distinction involves inherited variation and genetic mutations. Inherited variation refers to the DNA passed from parents to children during reproduction. Mutations are changes in DNA sequences that can occur spontaneously over time. Some mutations occur during the formation of reproductive cells and may be inherited by future generations. Others occur during life as cells divide and respond to environmental exposures. Most behavioral genetics focuses on inherited variation rather than newly acquired mutations. Scientists also distinguish between rare genetic disorders and common complex traits. Certain rare disorders result from mutations in a single gene with large biological effects. Examples include several inherited metabolic disorders identified through newborn screening programs. These conditions differ from common behavioral traits influenced by many genes simultaneously. Personality, intelligence, anxiety tendencies, and emotional regulation involve broad networks of biological influences. The complexity of these traits makes single gene explanations scientifically inaccurate. Public genetics education programs emphasize that complexity is the normal pattern for human characteristics. Another misconception involves the role of family environment in development. People sometimes assume that shared family experiences explain nearly all behavioral similarities between relatives. Research suggests that shared environments matter, but individual experiences also contribute significantly. Brothers and sisters growing up in the same household often experience different friendships and opportunities. They may attend different classes, develop different hobbies, or respond differently to family events. These unique experiences contribute to differences even among closely related individuals. Scientists sometimes refer to these influences as non-shared environmental factors. Non-shared experiences help explain why siblings can develop distinct personalities despite shared genetics in households. This observation reinforces the idea that development remains dynamic across the lifespan. Human traits continue changing because experiences continue shaping biological systems. Learning new skills creates changes in neural connections throughout adulthood. Relationships influence emotional development and stress responses over many years. Physical activity affects cardiovascular health and brain function regardless of inherited tendencies. Nutrition influences metabolism and energy regulation across the lifespan. Sleep patterns affect memory, attention, and emotional regulation every single day. These environmental influences interact continuously with inherited biological characteristics. The existence of genetic influences should therefore encourage understanding rather than fatalism. Knowing that a trait has inherited components can support prevention and early intervention. Public health programs often use family history to identify individuals who may benefit from additional screening. Family history provides information about risk, not certainty. A family history of high blood pressure does not guarantee future hypertension. A family history of depression does not guarantee future depression. A family history of diabetes does not guarantee future diabetes. Awareness of risk allows people and healthcare professionals to monitor and reduce modifiable factors. This approach reflects one of the major lessons of modern genetics. Genes influence development, but they rarely eliminate the importance of environment and behavior. The relationship between biology and experience is cooperative rather than competitive. Inherited variation creates possibilities and tendencies that unfold across changing environments. Life experiences shape how those tendencies are expressed throughout childhood, adulthood, and aging. Understanding this principle helps replace the idea of genetic destiny with the more accurate concept of genetic predisposition. Heritable traits reflect probabilities shaped by biology, experience, and the environments people encounter throughout their lives. One of the greatest achievements of modern genetics is showing that biology and environment work together instead of competing for control. For many years, people debated whether genes or environment mattered more in human development. Scientists now recognize that this question is too simple to describe how living systems actually function. Genes need environments to operate, and environments influence how genetic potential develops across life. A seed provides a useful example of this relationship between inherited information and surrounding conditions. A seed contains genetic instructions for building a particular type of plant. Those instructions remain important, but the final outcome depends on sunlight, water, soil, and temperature. The healthiest seed cannot grow properly without the resources needed for development. Likewise, favorable conditions cannot transform an apple seed into an oak tree. Human development follows similar biological principles throughout the lifespan. Genes provide instructions and biological tendencies for growth and function. Environmental conditions influence how those tendencies develop over time. Neither factor alone provides a complete explanation for human characteristics. Scientists often describe development as a continuous interaction between inherited biology and lived experience. This interaction begins before birth and continues throughout life. Prenatal nutrition influences fetal growth and brain development during pregnancy. Exposure to harmful substances can affect normal developmental processes before birth. After birth, nutrition continues supporting growth and healthy brain function. Language exposure shapes communication skills during childhood and adolescence. Education strengthens cognitive abilities through repeated learning and practice. Physical activity supports muscle development, cardiovascular health, and certain aspects of brain function. Social relationships influence emotional regulation and stress responses throughout life. These experiences interact with inherited biology rather than replacing it. This interaction explains why people with similar genetic backgrounds can develop differently across time. Identical twins provide some of the clearest examples of this principle. As children, identical twins often appear remarkably similar in appearance and behavior. As adults, differences gradually emerge because their experiences become increasingly unique. Different careers expose them to different physical and psychological demands. Different friendships influence emotional experiences and social learning. Different hobbies strengthen different skills and habits. Different life events create different opportunities and challenges. Their shared genetics remain important, but experience gradually shapes individual development. Scientists sometimes use the phrase developmental pathway to describe this ongoing process. A developmental pathway is the sequence of biological and environmental events that shape outcomes across life. Small differences early in development can influence later opportunities and experiences. A child who develops an early interest in music may practice regularly for many years. Practice strengthens skills and increases confidence through repeated success. Increased confidence encourages additional practice and learning opportunities. Eventually, the individual may appear naturally talented despite years of environmental influence. Inherited tendencies may have contributed to the original interest or aptitude. The final outcome reflects both biology and accumulated experience. This pattern is sometimes called cumulative development because small influences build over time. Another important concept is resilience. Resilience refers to the ability to adapt successfully despite difficult circumstances or challenges. Research supported by public health agencies shows that resilience itself involves multiple influences. Inherited biological characteristics contribute to stress responses and emotional regulation. Supportive relationships can strengthen coping abilities during difficult periods. Education and problem-solving skills improve adaptation to changing situations. Communities and social resources provide practical and emotional support. Resilience emerges from interactions among these influences rather than a single factor. The existence of genetic risk does not eliminate the possibility of resilience. Likewise, favorable genetics do not guarantee resilience under every circumstance. This balanced perspective helps avoid extreme conclusions about human potential. Another misconception is that people inherit fixed limits for learning and achievement. Modern neuroscience shows that the brain remains capable of adaptation throughout life. Learning creates changes in neural connections through repeated experience. Practice strengthens communication among relevant brain networks. Mistakes provide feedback that improves future performance. Sleep helps stabilize newly learned information in memory systems. According to neuroscience research, these processes continue throughout adulthood. Inherited biology influences learning, but experience remains essential for skill development. This principle explains why education has measurable effects across populations. If genes determined outcomes completely, education would have little influence on achievement. The success of teaching and training demonstrates the importance of environmental experience. Public health provides another illustration of this interaction. Certain individuals inherit increased risk for cardiovascular disease. Healthy eating patterns can reduce some aspects of that risk. Regular physical activity supports heart and blood vessel function. Medical screening allows earlier detection of developing problems. Medication may reduce additional risk factors when appropriate. Genetic predisposition remains important, but outcomes can still change. The same principle applies to many areas of health and behavior. Scientists therefore distinguish between susceptibility and certainty. Susceptibility means that certain outcomes become more likely under particular conditions. Certainty means an outcome will happen regardless of circumstances. Most inherited human characteristics involve susceptibility rather than certainty. Family history illustrates this concept in everyday life. Many people know relatives who develop specific medical conditions. Learning about family history can provide useful information about possible risks. Healthcare professionals often ask about family history during medical evaluations. This information helps identify areas where monitoring may be beneficial. It does not function as a prediction of inevitable future disease. The goal is awareness and prevention rather than fear. Understanding genetics can also reduce unnecessary guilt and blame. Parents sometimes worry that they caused every aspect of their children's development. Children sometimes believe inherited tendencies make improvement impossible. Scientific evidence supports a more balanced understanding. Parents provide both genes and environments that influence development. Children actively interact with those environments through their own choices and experiences. Communities, schools, friendships, and cultural influences also contribute to development. Human growth reflects contributions from many interacting systems. Another important lesson from genetics is the value of individual variation. Variation allows populations to adapt to changing environments across generations. Different combinations of inherited characteristics create diversity within human populations. Some individuals excel in physical endurance. Others show strengths in memory, creativity, communication, or problem solving. No single combination of characteristics represents a perfect genetic pattern. Different environments may favor different abilities and skills. This diversity contributes to the flexibility and resilience of human populations. Modern genetics also encourages humility about prediction. Scientists can identify tendencies and probabilities with increasing accuracy. Predicting the exact future of a single individual remains extremely difficult. Countless biological and environmental influences interact across decades of life. Chance events also shape opportunities and experiences in unpredictable ways. A supportive teacher can inspire a lifelong career interest. An unexpected injury can redirect future goals. A new friendship can influence habits and decisions for many years. These experiences become part of each person's developmental pathway. The relationship between genes and environment therefore remains dynamic throughout life. Genes influence the development of biological systems that support behavior and health. Experiences continuously shape those biological systems through learning and adaptation. This interaction begins before birth and continues until the end of life. The concept of heritability helps scientists understand variation across populations. It does not assign fixed destinies to individuals. Heritable traits can still respond to education, healthcare, nutrition, relationships, and life experiences. Genetic predispositions influence possibilities without guaranteeing outcomes. Biology provides important foundations, but development remains an ongoing process shaped by interaction and change. The central lesson of modern genetics is simple but powerful. Heritable does not mean unchangeable. Predisposition does not mean prediction. Genes matter, environments matter, and human development emerges from the continuous interaction between both across an entire lifetime. Thanks for watching World Wellness Mind, Brain, and Behavior.
Thanks for watching! Hope you liked it!